Welcome back, seekers of the strange, and welcome to Gemstone Kingdom, where beauty is never skin deep. Before they were auctioned in glass cases, before they were locked in safes or worn by billionaires on red carpets, these stones were offered to something else, not to kings, not to gods, but to the devil himself, or whatever name ancient priests dared not write aloud. Blood was spilled, words were whispered, fires were lit, then left to burn without tending. In every case, these gemstones were not found. They were summoned. And today, the same stones now appear in auctions, on display, labeled, cut, polished, but the history, hidden, omitted, or worse, forgotten. Tonight, Gemstone Kingdom takes you into the shadows behind the price tags, because some stones weren't born for beauty. They were born to bargain. These are the 10 gemstones once offered to the devil, and now worth millions. Some say all gems are gifts from the earth, but not these. These were summoned, offered, not to the gods of light, but to something older and far less forgiving. They were burned, buried, and blessed in blood. Some were placed at the feet of idols. Others were swallowed, sealed inside walls, or worn during nights when no stars dared shine. Today they rest behind velvet glass in private collections, but before they were worth millions, they were worth souls. Welcome to Gemstone Kingdom, and tonight we trace 10 stones once offered to the devil, and now hunted by the rich. Let's begin where most rituals did, with blood, still warm. Rank 10. Carnelian. The Blood Oath Stone. Deep in the desert valleys of northern Mesopotamia, just beyond the dried riverbeds and under layers of unbaked clay, lies a stone once buried with warriors and pulled from the hands of kings. Carnelian. A variety of chalcedony, formed from silica-rich fluids seeping into volcanic rock, is colored by iron oxide over thousands of years. But long before mineralogists labeled it, ancient civilizations had already named it something else: the bloodstone that answers. Found across Iran, Syria, and modern-day Iraq, carnelian was one of the first stones ever engraved by human hands. It was not mined in the way we think of mining today. In early periods, it was gathered from riverbeds along the Euphrates, picked from exposed layers of sediment, or broken out from reddish volcanic veins. It took days to find pieces large enough to carve, and even longer to polish by hand, using only sand, leather, and patience. The color is what always drew attention. Not red, not orange. Something in between, like sunset filtered through smoke. The ancient Sumerians referred to it as Nalam-Tu, which roughly translates to the blood of the agreement. In rituals, it was placed between two parties during oaths. If the pact was broken, it was said the stone would darken over time. No science confirms that. However, curators at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford note that many ancient carnelian seals recovered from royal tombs appear darker than when they were first catalogued. The shape varied depending on the era. In Sumer, it was oval or teardrop shaped and worn close to the heart. In Babylon, rectangular amulets were etched with binding sigils. In Persia, it became rounded, smoothed flat on one side for engraving prayers, names, or invocations. But whatever the shape, carnelian was always placed on the body as if it were meant to be listened to. One carved piece found in the ruins of Mari near the Syrian border bears an inscription not in cuneiform, but in a script that doesn't match any known record from the time. The carving is primitive, but precise, and next to it, a single image, two figures shaking hands. One of them is missing a face. Today, carnelian is mined commercially in India, Brazil, and Madagascar. But stones of ancient Mesopotamian origin are incredibly rare. When transformed into jewelry, high-grade translucent carnelian, without visible banding, can range from $30 to $500 per piece, depending on size and craftsmanship. But those carved in antiquity, museum-quality seals have sold privately for $50,000, and one rumored specimen, allegedly retrieved from a pre-Akkadian burial, was offered at silent auction for over $120,000. Yet even at that price, one question remained unanswered. Why was it buried with the dead? if it was forged to seal pacts among the living. Some researchers believe that ancient rulers believed the oath continued after death, that even beyond the grave, Carnelian would hold both parties to their word. Others say it wasn't about truth, but control, that once offered in darkness, the stone no longer belonged to you. You belong to it. And that's why Carnelian begins this list, not because it glows, not because it's rare, but because it was the first to be invited into a pact no one dared to break. Carnelian was the stone they bled onto, a vessel, warm, alive, obedient. But not all rituals ended with the cut. Some required the wound to be witnessed, repeated, etched, forever. The next stone didn't absorb the blood. It reflected it, so that the gods or demons or something else entirely could see their offering in perfect, merciless clarity. Rank 9, Hematite, the mirror that drank blood in rituals. It looks like metal, heavy in the hand, cold to the touch. But it is not iron, it is hematite, a stone forged by the earth from iron oxide and pressure, then polished until it reflects like a war god's eye. In Latin, its name translates to bloodstone, but the blood didn't come from its color. It came from what it witnessed. Hematite has been extracted for over 40,000 years. In ancient northern Africa, tribes along the Air Mountains ground it into powder to paint the dead, believing it would protect them from the spirits of the desert. In Mesopotamia and Anatolia, it was cut into flat tablets, rubbed with oil or animal fat until it became reflective. These were not ornaments. They were mirrors, used not to view the self, but to call what could not be seen. In Sumerian rites of protection, hematite mirrors were placed facing temple doors, sharpened at the edge to form a blade-like crescent. During bloodletting rituals, the priest would anoint the mirror with drops from their palms or tongues, believing the stone required recognition before it would reveal itself. Inscriptions recovered near Eridu describe it as the eye that sees without blinking, the seal that does not forgive. No one truly knows what the reflection showed, only that witnesses stopped speaking afterward. The physical properties of hematite made it ideal for manipulation. It polishes like silver. It weighs more than expected. And when cut into curved surfaces, it warps the image, creating a distortion that, in low light, appears to move on its own. Archaeological finds in Syria, Turkey, and Iran suggest hematite was most commonly shaped into ovals and rectangles, roughly the size of a human hand. Some were flat, others were domed, concave or convex, depending on whether the user wanted to focus inward or outward. One mirror recovered from a subterranean chamber beneath Hattusa bore no carving, just a single red stain in the center. Tests confirmed it was human blood from over 2,600 years ago. Today, hematite is found in abundance and mined industrially in Brazil, Australia, and China. Commercial-grade hematite jewelry is inexpensive, often under $50. But ancient ritual hematite? That is another matter. In 2007, a hematite seal from Assyria, engraved with figures performing a ritual in front of a crescent mirror, sold at auction for $88,000. Private collectors now track Sumerian hematite mirrors with reflective polish, especially those recovered near ziggurat sites. One unlisted piece, traced back to a private collection in Geneva, was quietly offered for $200,000 and disappeared. Why the secrecy? It may be because hematite doesn't just reflect, it remembers. Priests once claimed that after enough rituals, the mirror would stop showing your face and begin showing something else, something that I had been watching, waiting, listening. And so, while hematite is no longer feared, it is never quite trusted. Because when a stone has been offered blood, the offering never fully ends. Hematite remembered the ritual. But the next stone was there for all of it. Before the cut, during the scream, after the silence. It didn't absorb, it didn't reflect, it witnessed, unblinking. From the hand of the priest, from the altar of gods now long forgotten. Rank 8, Obsidian, the eye that witnessed every sacrifice. It shatters like glass, cuts like steel. But it's not artificial, it's obsidian, The stone that forms when molten lava cools so fast it never has time to crystallize. The result, a volcanic mirror, blacker than midnight, sharper than any blade forged by hand. However, this stone wasn't made for use as a weapon. It was made to witness. For the Aztecs, it was the eye of Tezcatlipoca, the god of night, war, sorcery, and judgment. Not a metaphor, a literal eye, carved from obsidian and placed at the center of altars, faced those who approached. Its surface was polished until it reflected the faces of the condemned. And it was said, if your reflection blinked, you would not return. Obsidian was sacred long before the Aztecs. Excavations in Teotihuacan reveal caches of obsidian blades placed beneath ceremonial pyramids, many still stained with organic residue, evidence of bloodletting, animal offerings, and possibly human sacrifice. In Maya territories, obsidian mirrors were buried in tombs of priests. In Oaxaca, a temple complex had walls inlaid with its fragments arranged like broken pupils across a chamber of silence. It wasn't just used to see, it used to be seen. Geologically, obsidian is found in regions of past volcanic activity: Mexico, Guatemala, Armenia, Ethiopia, and parts of the U.S., like Oregon and Arizona. The highest quality specimens, known for glassy luster and deep uniform color, come from the highlands of central Mexico and Mount Hecla in Iceland. Ancient quarrying methods were brutal. Obsidian veins were struck with bone tools or harder volcanic rock, splitting shards that sliced bare skin on contact. Only a few pieces were large enough to be polished into discs. These were reserved, never worn, never traded. Only used, and only in blood. A typical obsidian mirror from the late post-classic era is circular, measuring between 10 and 20 centimeters in diameter. The surface is slightly convex. This distortion served a purpose, causing the viewer's face to bulge, as one colonial Spanish friar wrote, as if consumed by shadow from within. Some mirrors are engraved on the back with Nahuatl glyphs. One, recovered in 1993 near Texcoco, bears the symbol for two mouths, a likely reference to a speaking spirit. Another, housed in the British Museum, has no markings, only polish so pure that under low light, it still reflects clearly after 600 years. According to legend, it once belonged to John Dee, the court astrologer of Queen Elizabeth I. Today, obsidian is widely available, sold as knives, spheres, and even jewelry. But sacred or historic mirrors, especially from Mesoamerican cultures, are highly restricted. A 14th century obsidian mirror linked to high priests in Tenochtitlan was appraised at over $500,000, but was never publicly sold. Most remain in locked collections, sealed behind black curtains, not because they're too fragile, but because of what they might still reflect. Some say these mirrors never stopped watching, that they absorbed every scream, every chant, every final breath offered beneath them. And that when you look into one now, you don't see your face, you see the last thing it saw. And that is why obsidian was never just a stone. It was an eye, a memory, a witness that never blinks. Obsidian saw what was done, but the next stone, it agreed to it, not as a tool, as a participant. It was never worn for beauty. It was coiled, whispered to, anointed in venom, and buried beneath temples that no map dares mark today. It didn't just serve gods, it helped create them. Rank 7, Serpentine, the pact that bound snake, cults to darkness. It doesn't shine, it doesn't cut, but it moves, like something waiting to coil. This is serpentine, a soft green-black mineral that forms deep beneath tectonic plates, where oceanic crust is crushed, reheated, and reborn as stone. Its name says everything, from the Latin serpens, snake. But its story goes far beyond appearance. In ancient temples, this stone didn't just symbolize the serpent, it was offered to them. Throughout southern Albania, the Peloponnese, and the ruins of pre-Hellenic Crete, serpentine has been found beneath temple floors, cut into coils, embedded in altars, and laid at the feet of forgotten statues. In the oldest layers of the Lerna complex, archaeologists uncovered a ring of serpentine tablets, each engraved with grooves, too shallow to be language, too deliberate to be random. They surrounded a single stone basin. No inscriptions, no bones, just residue, organic, reddish-brown, dated to 1700 BCE. Ancient texts are sparse, but one fragment, recovered from a collapsed archive in Phaistos, refers to the Pact of the Coil and a rite where no flame may touch the mouth once the stone is marked. The context? An oath of silence and secrecy. In these cults, serpentine wasn't used to protect. It was used to bind, to seal voices, bury names, and erase memory. Geologically, serpentine is found on nearly every continent, often near subduction zones. Greece, Turkey, northern India, the Alps, and even parts of California. It's relatively soft, only 3 to 5 on the Mohs scale, and easily carved. Ancient artisans shaped it by hand, smoothing it into curved tiles, twisted beads, or, most notably, tongues. Dozens of these have been uncovered near the ruins of Epidaurus and Butrint, all with no symbols, just form, a tongue bound in stone. In ritual practice, initiates of serpent cults were said to swallow the stone, not physically, but spiritually. One priest would place the carved serpentine tongue on the initiate's lips. If accepted, the stone was buried within the temple grounds under the new member's name, thereafter sealed, never to be spoken of again. The idea wasn't death. It was a transformation. The voice becomes the cult. The body becomes the vessel. The pact becomes unbreakable. Today, serpentine is used in carvings, talismans, and even countertops. Common specimens fetch only 10 to 50 US dollars. But ancient serpentine? That's a different market. A pair of ritual tiles from a private Italian collection, provenance to a Hellenic shrine, sold quietly for $140,000. One unnamed museum acquired a serpent tongue, believed to originate from the Temple of Asclepius, for $275,000. It was never displayed, only cataloged and locked away. Why? Because stones used in silence don't always stay silent. Some researchers believe serpentine carries vibrational memory, an echo of sound absorbed through time. A few spiritualists claim to have heard hissing when handling unclean samples. One case report mentions a woman who spoke a complete sentence in Linear a language she had never studied, after meditating with serpentine from Crete. Coincidence? Maybe. But maybe that's why serpent cults chose this stone. Not for protection, but because it doesn't forget a voice. Once it's taken one, serpentine belonged to the cults that chose darkness. But the next stone belonged to those who were left in it, not out of hunger for power, but out of grief so deep it had to be heard. Even if the one listening wasn't human, carried in mourning veils, hidden in coffins, whispered too long after the body turned cold, and sometimes it whispered back. Rank 6, Jet, the curse that fed on grief and summoned shadows. It looks like stone, but it's not. It burns, and it smells like something ancient trying to breathe. This is jet, fossilized wood transformed over millions of years under heat, pressure, and silence. In the hands of the living, it became a token of mourning. In the hands of the dead, it became something else. Jet has been used in burial rites for over 4,000 years. In Bronze Age graves across northern Britain and Spain, archaeologists have uncovered jet beads arranged not just around the neck, but across the lips, eyes, and fingertips. One excavation in Northumberland revealed a jet amulet placed inside the mouth of a child. It bore no symbols, just a crack, like something once tried to speak through it. In ancient Celtic belief, jet was believed to ward off grief. A mourner would wear it until their sorrow subsided. But if they wore it too long, the grief wasn't released. It was absorbed. And when enough sorrow was taken in, the stone began to whisper it back. Roman historians wrote of jet being burned during funerals to repel spirits. But other accounts, less well known, tell of summoning shadows. Pliny the Elder noted that jet, when placed in water, caused serpents to flee. But when placed under a pillow, dreams turned black. Some priests of Cybele banned it from sanctuaries altogether. Geologically, jet is a form of lignite coal, technically organic, not mineral. It forms when decaying wood is buried under sediment, then compressed for over 10 million years. The finest jet comes from Whitby, England, where the fossilized remnants of Jurassic forests lie hidden in coastal cliffs. Roman artisans prized it above gold for amulets. Victorian mourners wore it to funerals, believing it honored the dead, without inviting them back. But not all jets are smooth. Some pieces hum, some crackling in the fire. Some, when rubbed between cloth and skin, generate static strong enough to lift ash. The ancient Norse believed this ghost pull meant the stone was remembering someone or waiting for them to return. Jet is easily carved, soft enough to etch with bone or bronze, yet durable in dry climates. In museums, jet artifacts include rings, bracelets, amulets, and even death masks. One scarce item, a jet spindle whorl recovered from a Neolithic site in Galicia, Spain, used in funerary spinning rituals to bind the threads of memory. It was never catalogued. It simply vanished after photography. Modern jet jewelry ranges from $20 to $300, but genuine Whitby Victorian jet, handcrafted and historically worn during mourning, fetches up to $15,000 to $30,000 at estate auctions. A single piece traced to the household of Queen Victoria's ladies-in-waiting sold privately for $110,000, but the buyer never confirmed receipt, and the shipping label was returned unopened. Some say jet doesn't just absorb sadness, it feeds on it, that each time a mourner weeps while wearing it, something inside the stone listens, remembers, waits, and when enough sorrow has been collected, the stone does what grief always does. It comes back, as a shadow, as voice, as a curse. That's why jet was buried, not to honor the dead, but to seal what grief left behind. Jet answered the cries of the grieving, but the next stone, it was never meant for mourning, it was meant for control. Not over spirits, not over sorrow, but over entire empires. It was worn by those who drank poison slowly and fed it to others even slower. A stone of red promise, of death behind thrones, and pacts no one survived to break. Rank 5. Cinnabar. The crimson pact that poisoned empires. Its color is seductive, deep scarlet, bordering on black under shadow. But it is not ruby, it is cinnabar, mercury sulfide, the world's primary ore of liquid silver, and one of the most toxic minerals ever known. The ancients didn't fear it, they worshipped it. The first known use of cinnabar dates back to the Neolithic period in China. At Jiahu 7,000 years ago, early graves were lined with crimson dust, not for preservation, for passage. They believed cinnabar carried the spirit through the veil because only those touched by the underworld could wear the blood of earth without dying. The Shang dynasty later ground it into a paste to paint the walls of royal tombs. In Mesoamerica, Olmec and Maya elites covered skulls with cinnabar, believing it bound the soul to the bone. In ancient Rome, it was the imperial pigment, mined from the volcanic caves of Almaden, where men died choking on the vapor, and enslaved people went blind before the age of 30. But the stone kept flowing, because emperors demanded red. Cinnabar's spiritual role wasn't limited to death. In Taoist alchemy, it became central to internal elixirs, where monks consumed trace mercury, believing it opened gates to immortality. In Tibet, it was burned in sealed chambers during thunder rituals. And in Iran, high magi allegedly poured it into ritual cuts as a soul blood seal. Those who survived were marked. Those who didn't were said to whisper through the fumes. Geologically, cinnabar forms in hydrothermal veins near volcanoes and hot springs, such as in Spain, China, Peru, and parts of California. It appears as bright red crystal clusters inside dull gray rock, often mistaken for ruby by the untrained eye. But unlike ruby, it crumbles. Touch it bare-handed too long, and you risk absorption. Heat it, and it releases mercury vapor, invisible, odorless, and deadly. Yet despite the risk, entire empires were built on it. The Roman trade in vermilion, cinnabar pigment, was so tightly controlled that a single amphora of powdered stone could fetch the price of an enslaved person. In China's Han Dynasty, carved cinnabar lacquerware was reserved only for nobility, and those who shaped it rarely lived past 40. In ritual practice, cinnabar was often shaped into seals, amulets, and tongue slabs, which were placed beneath the tongue of the deceased or held over the heart during fire ceremonies. One artifact recovered from a sealed cave near Xiangshan depicts a three-eyed figure holding a bowl of liquid red. No script, no date, just a smear across the chest, preserved despite 2,000 years of stillness. Today, cinnabar is banned from commercial jewelry in most countries. Synthetic red lacquer mimics the look without the poison, but real cinnabar still moves through private channels. A carved imperial talisman from the 18th century fetched $480,000 in a closed Sotheby's sale. One Ming Dynasty ritual box, coated in 80 layers of cinnabar lacquer, was pulled from public display after curators reported burning in the lungs near its case. Some say the stone still breathes, that even sealed it continues to leak essence, not just of mercury, but of those who gave their final breath through it. Because cinnabar was never merely a pigment, it was a pact, a crimson covenant between rulers and what waited beyond the veil. One offered willingly, one that never could be undone. Cinnabar whispered through courts and poisoned crowns. But the next stone didn't corrupt from within, it was corrupted from above. They called it pure, sacred, a vessel of light untouched by shadow, until someone invited the shadow in. What was once protection became a prison. What once repelled darkness now holds it, silently glowing. Rank 4, Selenite, the sacred light twisted by forbidden rituals. It looks like frozen moonlight, soft, pale, and pure. But even purity, when broken, it can become a vessel for something else. This is selenite, a crystalline form of gypsum found in deserts and salt basins across the world. Transparent, fragile, and revered by priests for centuries, not because it was rare, but because it was said to glow in silence, even in absolute darkness. In ancient Mesopotamia, selenite was known as the breath of Ningal, goddess of the moon. Tablets from the Temple of Ur describe its use in divination, where polished wands of selenite were pointed toward the heavens to channel dreamlight. In Egypt, it lined the walls of priestly crypts, not to trap spirits but to reflect them when they tried to rise. But somewhere along the Silk Road, that changed. The purity of selenite caught the attention of those who wished to bend it, to twist the sacred into something controllable, to reflect not light, but will. In northern Persia, archaeologists uncovered a sealed ritual chamber buried beneath a Zoroastrian fire temple. Inside, a circle of selenite rods, arranged to face inward, like a cage made of light. At the center lay a stone bowl, filled with traces of burnt myrrh, sulfur, and what carbon analysis revealed to be ox blood. This wasn't purification, it was inversion, a right to corrupt clarity, to turn revelation into submission. Geologically, selenite forms in evaporative environments such as arid deserts, salt flats, and dried seabeds. The most famous specimens come from the Cave of the Crystals in Naka, Mexico, where columns of selenite stretch over 30 feet tall, locked in a chamber so hot that no human can survive more than 10 minutes inside. However, ritual selenite is smaller. Hand-sized wands, discs, and plates are used for spiritual purposes. Smooth, striated, and often cool to the touch, these pieces carry an electric stillness. They don't hum, they wait. In early Christian heresies around the Dead Sea, selenite was said to be a mirror without sin. But some fringe sects believed that if a man stared long enough into unbroken selenite, he would see his soul fracture. Writings found in the Cave of Letters suggest rebels used selenite blades, not to cut flesh, but to sever names during forbidden rites of memory erasure. Both the temple and the empire outlawed these ceremonies. Today, selenite is commercially available. A wand costs less than $20. A lamp, often marketed as a cleansing energy device, sells for $40 to $200. However, ritual-grade selenite, sourced from ancient sites, is rarely offered publicly. A fragment recovered from the ruins of Hatra, inscribed with a vanished dialect and embedded with dried resin, was reportedly sold to a private Middle Eastern buyer for $300,000. No museum claims it, no customs record exists, and yet copies of it have appeared, as if someone remade the mold. Scholars still debate whether selenite retains the properties to which it is subjected, but spiritualists agree on one thing: it amplifies intent. Whether that intent is prayer, or control, or silence, that's not the stone's choice. That's ours. Selenite was never meant for darkness, but when the sacred is forced to serve the profane, the echo is not redemption, it is a consequence. Selenite glowed with a purity that was never meant to last, but the next stone didn't shine. It sang, not to guide, not to heal, but to call. Names not spoken in centuries, names carved out of language itself. And when the singing stopped, what was answered wasn't silence. It was something older. Something is still listening. Rank 3, Celestite, the choir stone, that echoed forbidden names. It sounds like music, even when it shouldn't. Celestite, also called Celestine, is named for the heavens, but not everything from the sky is gentle, and not every voice it reflects was meant to be heard. Geologically, celestite is a strontium sulfate mineral that forms in sedimentary rock. It's known for its pale blue crystals, clustered like frozen hymns, fragile, brittle, but beautiful enough to be mistaken for something divine. Most commercial specimens come from Madagascar, Ohio, or Sicily, but in the ruins of ancient Palmyra, one crystal cluster was found embedded in a ceremonial bronze bowl, its base scorched, its edges engraved with names that do not appear in any known language. In temple rites across Mesopotamia and Phoenicia, Celestite was referred to as the breath of the sky gods. Priests would place shards around prayer chambers to amplify the vibrations of chanting. Some claimed that Celestite didn't just carry sound, it recorded it. The theory? That if a ritual failed, the stones could be reassembled to replay the sacred frequency. But something happened. A recovered tablet near Khatna recounts the story of an unnamed priest who attempted to summon a celestial being by reciting a name inscribed on Celestite. Not speaking it, singing it. What followed was recorded. The choir turned, but no voice was theirs. Celestite naturally resonates under pressure. In laboratory settings, it emits high-frequency tones when struck or fractured, a property early priests may have interpreted as voice. When shaped into thin discs, celestite was sometimes placed in sealed resonance boxes, activated by drumbeat or chant. However, when combined with other minerals, especially sulfur or mercury vapor, the vibration becomes distorted. One archaeologist, during a dig near Aleppo, reported hearing a high ringing note while unpacking a celestite bowl. Even though no sound was playing, the recording equipment failed. The team never returned. Ritual celestite appears in three forms: cluster altars, meant to reflect and distort prayer; carved spikes, arranged in vocal triangles; ground powder mixed with oil and blood for voice ink. In a ruined Anatolian chapel, a wall bore inscriptions of dozens of names, none of which were readable. Each name was etched using celestite ink. Under UV light, the letters fluoresced for less than 3 seconds, then faded. But the sound system in the chamber picked up a tone that hadn't been there before. Today, celestite is used in sound healing, meditation, and interior decor. A large cluster sells for $200 to $1,000 US. However, ancient celestite artifacts, especially those used in temple acoustics, are considered too unstable to be displayed. A single choir bowl, traced to a suppressed Phoenician sect, sold for $220,000 in a silent bid, and was never documented again. Some spiritual historians believe celestite reacts not to human voice, but to intent. Those names spoken with fear do nothing, but names sung with certainty, even false certainty, open something else. That's why certain groups banned its use entirely, not because of the sound it carried, but because it sometimes answered. In the end, Celestite may be the only stone on this list that doesn't hide. It calls. And if you're foolish enough to call back, the choir won't stop. Even if no one's left to sing, Celestite called out. But the next stone opened inward. It didn't echo. It didn't glow. It reflected, but not the world, the self, and not the part we show, the part we lock away. Some saw nothing. Some saw too much. And some never came back. Rank 2. Labradorite, the mirror that let the darkness. In it glows, but only when you're not looking straight at it. It shifts, blue, green, gold, violet, like memory sliding behind fog. This is labradorite, a feldspar mineral born from volcanic fire and cooled under pressure until it fractures the light itself. Scientists call it labradorescence, an optical effect caused by internal layers scattering photons. But to ancient mystics, it wasn't just reflecting light. It was holding something inside. Found in the cold reaches of Labrador, Canada, this stone was first revered by Inuit shamans, who claimed it was the frozen sky, shattered pieces of the aurora trapped beneath the earth. However, in Siberia, Scandinavia, and parts of the Balkans, Labradorite assumed a darker significance. It wasn't just a light in the dark, it was a door. In a collapsed monastery in northern Karelia, researchers uncovered a carved slab of labradorite positioned at the head of a prayer chamber, surrounded by a semicircle of animal bones and burnt feathers. The slab bore no text, only a groove, worn into the surface by repeated touch. Nearby scroll fragments referenced the veil's threshold and warned, "What you see is not beyond, it is beneath." Labradorite was often used in ritual mirrors, but unlike obsidian, it didn't reflect your image. Under firelight, shapes moved independently within it. A Russian folktale speaks of a seer who gazed too long into a labradorite disk, and afterwards spoke languages no one recognized. Some say not human. He later vanished. His mirror cracked from the inside. Mineralogically, labradorite forms in mafic igneous rocks, such as basalt and gabbro, and is commonly mined in Finland, spectrolite, Madagascar, Russia, and Canada. Its signature play of colors is only visible from specific angles, but ancient artisans didn't polish it to see beauty. They angled it to catch movement. In Balkan ritual magic, labradorite was placed under pillows during winter solstice rites. Practitioners believed it would reveal not dreams, but what waits when dreams are gone. In 1972, a carved labradorite amulet was recovered from a crypt in Ploiești. On its back was scratched a symbol resembling a closed eye, and beneath it, 3 slashes. The chamber in which it was found had no windows, but the stone shimmered, without light. Modern labradorite is affordable and is used in jewelry, tiles, and even countertops. Common specimens retail for $20 to $200, but ancient ritual labradorite, specially inscribed or unpolished, fetches far more. One disc, linked to a Lithuanian death rite and never publicly displayed, reportedly sold for $360,000 in a transaction involving 3 private brokers, none of whom disclosed the buyer's identity. The disc was said to be cold even in direct sunlight. It was never seen again. Some geologists dismiss the stories. They say the internal fractures cause light scattering, nothing more. But others have noted something stranger. Labradorite sometimes darkens permanently after being worn during intense emotional trauma. Not scratched, not cracked, just clouded, as if it had taken something in and chosen not to give it back. So if you gaze into labradorite, be sure of your reflection, because what stares back may not be waiting to be seen, it may be waiting to enter. Labradorite revealed the darkness within, but the final stone came from something that fell through it. It was never meant to touch this world, a remnant, a relic, not of man, but of something that turned its back on heaven and paid for it. It was not forged, not mined, it was given willingly, in exchange for a silence that could never hold. Rank 1. Seraphinite, the fallen feather that sealed a forbidden oath. It looks like a feather frozen in stone, deep green with silvery white patterns that flash like wings under the right light. But this is no ordinary mineral. This is Seraphinite, named not for any earthly origin, but for the seraphim, the highest order of angels. Six-winged, ever burning, never seen by mortal eyes, until one fell. Seraphinite is a rare variety of clinichlor, formed deep within the metamorphic layers of eastern Siberia, specifically the Lake Baikal region, where tectonic forces crush ancient rock into layered elegance. But locals in Irkutsk never called it a crystal. They called it the wound that bled light. According to Buryat legend, a being from the sky descended into the frozen taiga during a night of no stars. Where it landed, nothing grew for 7 winters. And in the ice beneath, the first Seraphinite was found. The patterns weren't carved. They appeared naturally, like brushed feathers in motion. No two ever alike. Ancient Siberian shamans believed the stone held divine residue, the last breath of a being that chose to defy heaven's silence. Not for war, for truth. Among early monastic orders who migrated eastward during the 4th century, Seraphinite was forbidden. A recovered manuscript from a burned Orthodox monastery near Ulan-Ude warned, "Do not wear what you should not walk in." One monk who did, an apothecary named Alian, was later found mumbling phrases in Old Syriac, eyes burned shut by unknown means. The only artifact near him was a Seraphinite talisman, shattered clean down the center, but still glowing faintly along the break. Seraphinite isn't rare geologically, but untouched Seraphinite, raw, unmilled, and never exposed to ritual fire, is vanishingly scarce. It cleaves easily, yet never splits clean. And that's the mystery. The stones that were used in vows, those worn by oath-bearers during secret rites, never shatter the same way twice. Some crack like glass. Others melt at the edges. In a private collection in Milan lies a carved Seraphinite pendant from the 9th century. Its back bears the etching of an eye with no pupil, surrounded by 6 crescent lines, interpreted by researchers as a celestial nonentity. Something once known, now unnameable. The pendant has never been displayed publicly. Its last known owner reportedly kept it sealed in a lead-lined case after his son began hearing singing without a source whenever he touched the box. Today, Seraphinite jewelry ranges from $100 to $2,000, depending on cut and polish. But stones traced to pre-Christian Siberian ritual sites, especially those carved into winged forms, have been banned from export by Russian heritage authorities. One such stone, smuggled into the UK in 2018, was appraised at over $650,000 US. It never went to auction. The buyer allegedly destroyed it. Why destroy something so beautiful? Because beauty born of disobedience carries a weight. And this stone was never meant to be a decoration. It was a covenant, sealed by something that fell, not to corrupt, but to warn. Seraphinite carries no curse. It carries a memory of what it cost to question the silence, of the wing that broke to bring a truth we were never meant to hear. Some say if you hold a raw Seraphinite to your chest in complete darkness, you'll feel a heartbeat. But it won't be yours. It will be the last one that stone ever carried. If these stones unsettled you, good. That means they're still working. But darkness was never the only force that shaped this world. Some stones weren't meant to curse. They were meant to guide, appearing not in rituals, but in dreams. In our next journey, we'll uncover the 10 light stones said to whisper in dreams, and the people who followed those whispers across deserts, oceans, and lifetimes. If you're still with us, subscribe, like, and let this channel grow, so we can continue to bring forgotten stones back into the light or into the shadows where they were buried for a reason.